So could you tell me a bit about your research and what you're currently doing right now?
Yeah, my research agenda focus on comparative politics and mostly institutional transition and governing bureaucracy.
Okay.
Yes. And my current research agenda focus on the origin of power alternation within an organization and I would like to extend it to a political scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so what education have you had so far, and where are you right now in your education? Like, what degree are you getting?
Yeah, I'm currently getting a PhD uh, degree in the political economy, and this is my second year in the program. Uh, I did my MA in social science in U Chicago, and
Hmm.
I finished my undergrad in China, Zhejiang University. Yeah,
Okay, great. So how would you define political economy in simple terms?
I think political economy um, is a paradigm that applies economic methodology to analyze political phenomena.
Hmm. Okay. What initially drew you to study bureaucracy and institutional transitions?
Because I kind of focus on the more concrete and grounded part of politics. So people always talks about the effects of some institution or what kind of institution is better for human being for like for the freedom, well-being, or economic growth of a country. But people sometimes they neglect the fact that institutions are endogenous, which means that they are an outcome. Why some bureaucracy is effective and why other bureaucracy or government is ineffective, and why there are autocracy in some countries and democracy in other countries. Like people tend to think about these things as a cause of effect, so that different institutions will result in different political outcome and the overall welfare of the society. But I would like to focus on them as an outcome, as a choice made by people, made by those critical political actors.
Oh, okay. So could you maybe go into further detail about how it's an outcome?
Because all institutions, they are historical. If we think about a constitution, well,
Mm-hmm.
we say that in a well-developed democracy, the constitution is strong.
Mm-hmm.
It serves as a exogenous constraint on the behavior of the government, of all our congressmen, congresswomen, and the bureaucrats. No one can work against it.
Mm-hmm.
But historically, why in the first place does people try to write this constitution down? And how can they enforce it? We cannot imagine that when a country was first founded and everyone just believed the magic of a constitution
Mm-hmm.
and act according to what it allows people to do or forbid people to not to do something. And yeah, so only when we think about how a institution is created and enforced or maybe sabotaged by people can we understand why the same institution perform differently in different countries or why different countries they chose different institutions historically and now have uh, different governance outcome.
Okay, that's so interesting. So why do you think institutional transitions matter in political and economic systems?
Because we still care about institutional transition. We like democracy and we would like the essence and the benefit of democracy to carry on to a country that adopts it,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very typical liberalist agenda. But if we only think about institution as a cause of effect, then the uh, solution will be very simple. We just ask all countries to mimic the institution of a quote unquote successful country, and then we believe there will be development, there will be freedom. But sometimes it's not the case because the performance of an institution is uh, influenced by some more substantive factors,
Mm-hmm.
more fundamental factors like the distribution of violence
Mm-hmm.
among maybe different ethnic groups, or do this country have a long tradition of bureaucracy and the state capacity, all these stuff. So we still care about institutional transition. We would like a kleptocracy or a tin pot autocracy to transit to a more well-performing regime, but we also must care about what factors can facilitate this transition, or alternatively speaking, what factors are hindering this institutional transition.
Oh, okay. So how does bureaucracy impact the efficiency and effectiveness of government policies?
When uh, when a modern country was first like coming to being in history, people have different idea about modernity. First, people would think that okay, we have been through a liberalist reform or a revolution. We have built a democracy,
Mm-hmm.
but then people face some troubles. Like we still need some agents to implement the will of the parliament or other representatives of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So we must care about the efficiency of bureaucracy, and we must reflect on the relationship between the bureaucracy and the parliament, which this dichotomy uh, kind of means that on the left hand side, we have Congress or Parliament, all these representative agencies. They express and aggregate the preference of the people, or
Mm-hmm.
more generally, the will of the state. And then we must delegate to bureaucrats to let them implement this will of the state, and we must monitor it. So sometimes we see that people can fix the problem in a Congress. They can reach an agreement to enact some bill or announce some policy. But the bureaucracy cannot effectively implement it, or they may distort the implementation. They may selectively implement the objectives from the upper level, or they may self-dealing in the implementing process.
Okay. So I think you touched on this a bit, but like, what are the biggest challenges bureaucracies face in transitioning political systems?
I think this involves the classical, a very classical question in the uh, economics.
Mhm.
So we have the principal agent problem, which means that the principal, we can consider it as the central government, or more generally, the will of the state or the people.
Mhm.
And we have an agent. The agent is a bureaucrat, and sometimes it's, in a general sense, the politician. So the politician always have an option to embezzle, to appropriate public funding, or they can uh, seek rent using their power. They can abuse their power. So,
Mhm.
given that they always have this option, we must make this option less attractive to the agent than the option that they kind of respect the will of the state, they kind of respect the well being of the people, and they will do what they can do to fulfill the policy that is announced by the center. So it's a problem of controlling.
Mhm.
only when a state is able to control its bureaucracy can the preference of the people being expressed after they are aggregated at the legislative agency.
Okay, that's so interesting.
So the challenge is that in a lot of third world countries, forgive me for using this old term,
Hmm.
and we have a lot of trouble to control the bureaucrats because we have a lot of street level, or we say grassroots level corruption.
Hmm.
Like they solicit money from the people, or they appropriate public funding. The central government in these scenarios are unable to provide incentive to these local agents. They cannot credibly say that if you perform well, you will be promoted, or you will have some legal monetary compensation, or other benefits. So to control bureaucracy, the central state must be able to build up a incentive compatible structure of governance so that they can absorb the bureaucrats and all other agents into the system and curb their tendency of self-dealing and make sure they implement the policy.
Okay, that's so interesting. So, kind of switching the topic a bit here, but like, how do transitions from authoritarian to democratic systems affect bureaucratic institutions?
This is a very controversial issue.
Okay.
So this is only my personal opinion from my readings. So sometimes we must admit that transition to democracy can actually hurt the efficiency of the bureaucrats
Oh.
because at least it is the uh, it is the end of an old regime with some political tradition and some existing governance structure, and we are building a new system. During this transitional process, there must be some costs, like political instability, and due to the lack of political order, there might be some rent-seeking behavior during the transition. Like see how Russia, after the breakdown of the Soviet Union,
Mhm.
those oligarchs they kind of obtained power and a lot of resources during the chaos of the marketization and reform. So this is part of the transitional cost, which means that it's always painful to switch your track. That's
Mhm.
one part of it. And the second part of it is that a democracy has its merit, but it also needs to solve the problem of accountability and the problem of political selection.
Mhm.
And building up a democracy, it carries a very good like the it's a good idea that we want a democracy, but in fact, we should say that we want a good democracy.
Mm.
So the um, the variety of democracy is very large. It's just like the variety of autocracies. If
Oh.
we compare a best performing autocracy like Singapore
Mhm.
to less developed democracy like some not so successful transition
Mhm.
from a autocracy to a democracy, we can see that their performance is quite different. So when we say that we care about the effect of transitioning from autocracy to democracy, we actually care about how can we make sure we can reduce the transitional cost, and we can make sure that the new regime uh, can overcome some problem to avoid from backsliding to a bad democracy.
Okay.
Yes, and bureaucracy is part of it. Sometimes we see that in an institutionalized autocracy,
Mhm.
even though the country is not democratic and a lot of people are disfranchised, but we can see some accountability of the bureaucracy because they face very tangible and strong incentives from the upper level government. Maybe it's their party leader or their great general. We don't know. But the center are able to control the bureaucrats. And after the democratization, since the collapse of the center regime, um, we lose a centralized authority. And then maybe the local ethnic group or even organized crime groups are able to capture the local bureaucracy because now they are uh, less controlled by the center. So it's the same problem.
Yeah.
So if we want the bureaucracy to perform well after the transition, we must make sure that we are not transiting to a better regime, like
Hmm.
by all means.
Yeah. So like how do you like ensure that the transition is to a good regime? And like what role do international organizations play in shaping institutional transitions? Are they positive like roles or are they negative roles?
I think international organizations they can play a critical role in a lot of uh, countries during their process of political transition because the international organization they can serve as a third party enforcers. They can provide incentives to the domestic political actors.
Hmm.
So because we see that why institutional transition or we say good governance in general is so hard to achieve because at the state level, in the highest level of politics in a country, there is no one can enforce the contract between those political actors, right? If
Hmm.
we have two firms to prevent one firm from hurting the other and benefit itself, we can ask the court, or we can ask maybe government bureaucracy to enforce the contract between them. But
Hmm.
who can enforce the deal between uh, the rebel leader and the incumbent? There's no one.
Yeah.
But if the institutional, but if there are some third party enforcers like international organizations, sometimes this will be smoother. We see that international organizations they play a critical role in the uh, after the civil war in Bosnia
Hmm.
and also in other uh, like international or domestic conflict
Hmm.
because international organizations they can play a critical role as a commitment device
Yeah.
like right they
Hmm.
can sanction those who violate the deal and they can support those who support the deal
Yeah.
but uh, to make this feasible the international organization must be delegated some power. However, we see that international organizations they can also play a detrimental role if without proper uh, governance structure because we see that different countries still have a different weight of say in the international organizations like the United Nations. Sometimes small countries they do not trust international organizations so much because they are afraid of the bias
Hmm.
in the international organizations. Mostly, uh, like some international organizations, they are more influenced by the superpowers in the
Hmm.
world. And for example, we see that there are some sentiments in Africa that those countries they do not trust French or
Hmm.
international organizations affiliated with the French government or like that. And
Hmm.
in Latin America, some countries kind of uh, mistrust the U.S.
Yeah.
So like the case of Burkina Faso, like there is a recent, maybe not so recent, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there is a coup, and one of their populist military leader grabs power, and he is a leftist.
Hmm.
So he expressed his lack of trust towards international organizations, especially those are affiliated with the French government. So we see that international organizations can play a critical role to provide political commitment and to process political conflict in some countries. But the existence of international organizations and based on the fact that it can still be influenced by other countries with their own incentives, cause the new commitment problem. We
Okay.
must make uh, international organizations accountable and at the same time delegate enough power for them. Or
Okay.
otherwise, they are less able to play an active role in uh, helping some countries with their development or try to process the domestic conflict.
Okay. That's so intriguing. So kind of switching the topic around over here, like what
Yeah.
advice would you give to a student interested in political economy or public administration?
I actually was in a public administration bachelor degree I have, and I'm also trying to get a political economy PhD degree. So
Huh?
um, I think my advice will be that we should first ask more why question,
Yeah.
and then we gonna ask some how question.
Okay.
We must wipe out all the ideological bias in our head.
Mm-hmm.
We must respect politics and governance as a dynamic system. It's just like a dynamic system in physics or other scientific disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
They are different because human societies they are more complicated, more unpredictable. But that's why we must treat uh, the real life politics seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, we must ask scientific questions first. Like,
Okay.
why do some countries uh, did this and others did that? We cannot skip this step and immediately say that uh, how are we gonna deal with some problem or like you should do this. I think this is a bad mindset because all I know is that I only know a little about things. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's so helpful. So what books, articles, or scholars would you recommend for someone interested in this field?
So you want me to recommend some books?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would recommend a student interested in political economy to read Osborne's An Introduction to Game Theory. Or maybe it's a name is a first class to game theory. I don't know, but it's a textbook about game theory.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm a formal theorist. I use game theory to study uh, politics. I
Mm-hmm.
think game theory is very important because it kind of build up your second brain. Because sometimes our reasoning or our inference they have underlying assumptions, but using the mindset of formal theory, or we can say like a game theory, it helps you to make clear that what are your assumptions. It helps you to pin down your logic into mathematical language, and it is a prevailing paradigm adopted by the current political economists.
Oh,
It is
okay.
it is more transparent,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's more tedious or
Yeah.
seems artificial because it's formal language, it's mathematical language. But if a student wants to have some serious exposure to the current literature of political economy and try to sharpen their thinking,
Mm-hmm.
sharpen their reasoning, I strongly recommend the students to learn some game theory, at
Okay.
least be a consumer of game theory. Yeah.
Okay. That's so helpful. Thank you so much. And those are all my questions for today. So thank you so much for all your time.
Yeah.
This was so helpful. Thank you so much.